Viewers, thank you for joining us. You're watching OBN Horn of Africa. This is our weekly program, Talk to OBN. In this edition, we'll be discussing some African matters, and I'm joined by Head of Communications of African Continental Unity Party, Kabala John. Kabala, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to be here.
Well, Africa has been grappling with issues of ethnic polarization and political instability. What is the ACUP's approach to democratizing Africa's political landscape and addressing these challenges, Kabala?
The priority of the ACUP, or the African Continental Unity Party, at the moment is to internationalize the struggle. At this moment in Africa, I don't think we can talk about development progress without primarily talking and tackling the issue of imperialism. That is to say that Africa is actually struggling with imperialism, which is creating division, creating instability, creating wars, sponsoring armed groups in Africa to destabilize the governments. So until we are able to tackle the issue of imperialism and to overcome imperialism, we are not going to be able to effectively implement our strategies or policies of development as we may have them, such as Agenda 63 in Africa, which apparently does not seem to be producing the expected results, simply because imperialist forces are still trying to work by all means to undermine any projects of development in Africa. So ACUP looks that the first task that we all across the continent need to tackle is the question of imperialism. Now, because imperialism has become an international phenomenon or a globalized phenomenon, we cannot fight it with local efforts. We cannot fight it as a country. We cannot fight it as a tribal warlord. So whatsoever, we need to build continent strategies to internationalize our struggle against imperialism. That is where ACP is coming to kind of create an awareness of the situation that we are facing in Africa, the crisis that is international, to try to internationalize our fight so that we can together, from the North Africa, East Africa, to the South and West, from the diaspora, and also including other countries that are fighting against imperialism, so that we can come together to team up and fight collectively and overcome the forces of imperialism. So this is the main strategy right now that ACUP is engaged in, to connect, the initiatives from east to west, even with the Russia, with the China, with Iran, with North Korea. All these countries that are fighting against imperialism are our potential allies so that all of us, we can come together and overcome imperialism. When we fight and win over imperialism, then comes the job of reconstructing Africa, and that will be solely the job of African people to do. And we have to go back in ourselves through Pan-Africanism to rebuild Africa that we want. That is the main strategy that we are laying down now as the African Continental Unity Party.
You're working on reconstructing Africa, and one of the tools is holding this national dialogue and reconciliation to halt this polarized political tortoise and political division. Many African nations have held national dialogue and reconciliation process to resolve political and historical division. Would the ACUP promote and support such peace and reconciliation initiatives across the continent, Kabala?
Definitely, dialogue and reconciliation is the way to go to silence guns in Africa, to create sustainable peace in Africa, and also to create an environment of inclusiveness, environment in which all the stakeholders find themselves, and of course, find a common hope to build Africa. The current environment in Africa is of tribal division, whereby each tribe or each subgroup has its own interpretation of history, interpretation of the present, and also of the future, which does not allow what we can call a collective agenda in the country to move forward. Because since we have different interpretations of history, of the present, of the future, we are pursuing different goals. Therefore, it's through dialogue and reconciliation that we are able to merge our differences, in terms of view, politics, and objectives, to come up with a collective objective, collective and inclusive objective that will allow us to fight together to build our country after we have already destroyed the forces of imperialism, which is trying to keep us divided and keep us fighting each other. So we are supporting dialogue across Africa, but one thing that we say as ACUP is that we want the dialogue to be initiated by Africans themselves and to be managed by Africans themselves. We are mature enough to handle our own problems. In most cases, countries in Africa that have implemented dialogues that were supervised by Western hegemony, such as the United States and France, those dialogues did not produce the fruits or the results that people wanted. They even end up in more escalation of conflicts and war and stuff like that. We know what is happening in Sudan as we're speaking right now. We know what is happening in the Congo as we're speaking right now. All these countries have gone through so many dialogues sponsored and monitored and supervised by Western powers, and they have not produced results. So what we say now as ACUP is that let's dialogues in Africa be an initiative of African people themselves and be managed by Africans themselves. So in other words, we need to really go beyond our current limitations to demonstrate to the world that we are no longer children that need to be supervised and monitored. We are able to speak to each other, to understand each other, and to come to a common understanding and eventually develop common blueprint for our development.
South Africa, Tunisia, Kenya, Rwanda, and some other African nations had held this national dialogue and reconciliation. What do we learn from this nation to undertake reconciliation and national dialogue?
Well, particularly like in South Africa, I would say, I would go back to my previous point. If the dialogue is an initiative of the oppressor, it means the dialogue will come to benefit the oppressor and its interest. For example, here in South Africa, after apartheid, they went through a reconciliation process, which ended up having the 13% of South African population, which is the white minority, controlling 87% of the land and pretty much the economy of the country. So that is not the result that we want to have after a dialogue. If we want, if we want to build a sustainable peace and development in Africa. Therefore, if dialogue needs to produce the results that we want, let it be our own initiative and our own project as African people. And we salute the Ethiopian government, championed by the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, to initiate the dialogue in Ethiopia, because we believe that only through dialogue, Ethiopian people, either the Tigrays, either the Amara, they'll be able to understand each other and forge a common and collective blueprint for the development of Ethiopia and eventually of Africa.
You've touched the ongoing national dialogue in Ethiopia, and that's in the making almost. It's on the final phase of implementing national dialogue. Lately, the Commission has been collecting major agendas for discussion. Now it's on delegate selection process to undertake the national dialogue. What do you know about the ongoing Ethiopian national dialogue process? And as a head of ACUP's communication strategist, what do you know about the ongoing peace process in Ethiopia?
Well, we understand the difficulties surrounding, the preparation of the national dialogue, and the difficulties actually stemming from other opposition leaders who are refusing, already declaring the dialogue is dead from the beginning, without even having to participate in the dialogue. And what we understand about it is that mostly because the Commission is trying to involve the masses, the people at the regional levels, people at the local levels, to be the participant in the dialogues, or also to give the inputs in the dialogue, or to define the blueprint of the dialogue. These elites, political opposition leaders, they feel like they are being excluded because mostly they believe that everything needs to be about themselves, not about the masses. But I think the initiative and the way that this preparation is being done to involve the people, the stakeholders at the regional level, at the local level, is the most important one, because only people at that level know the needs and the desire of the masses of Ethiopia, and they are the ones who can eventually define the blueprint. The reason I'm saying that is we are at the stage now that we need to come up with the solution of the masses. The political elites since 1960s, since the African independence period, they have come up with the solutions that are not really responding to the crisis of the masses. Mostly the solutions that they came up with was to promote themselves, at the international arena, while neglecting the crisis of the masses. So if the National Dialogue, commission, is trying to involve the masses, this is a good initiative. So this is what we understand, and we believe that people will come to their right mind and support this initiative and go to the end of it, so that the dialogue can take place and Ethiopia can see a new light of liberation, freedom, and sustainable peace. And one of the things that we don't like is when one of the leaders in our opposition party who declared that, I think in the army, in the rebel groups, who declared that one of the conditions for them to participate should be the kind of transitional government, inclusive transitional government, which means they are actually kind of undermining the elections that put the current government in place. So, and because they don't feel that they can win elections, they want to have a transitional government, which does not make sense. I think the matter now is to go to the dialogue, define a blueprint, and then organize the elections. And whoever who is able to convince the majority of Ethiopian people will become the leader of Ethiopia. But just declaring that we need to have a transitional government out of nothing as a condition to go to dialogue, it simply means that there's no willingness to create peace or to bring peace in Ethiopia, because simply people are really, winning their lives out of war, because they are being sponsored, they are getting weapons made in the West, and therefore they can continue with the war as it's, provides them with the means of life.
Drawing on your expertise, what recommendation would you like to give to this Ethiopian National Dialogue Commission, so as to ensure a successful national dialogue in the nation?
I think they have to work harder to include everyone, even though you cannot bring everyone in the same picture. In a country of many ethnic groups with different visions, it's difficult to bring everyone on board. But as much as people they can bring on board, it will be able to make this dialogue successful. So the point is to not have a already predetermined agenda, but to have everyone, to listen to everyone, to have everyone included in the process of defining the agenda of dialogue. That is how we are able to expect a sustainable peace in Ethiopia.
What is the literature definition and what ought to be the picture of national dialogue on the ground, as far as your knowledge concerns?
Of course, I mean, there's many ways to look at it. National dialogue can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but fundamentally, national dialogue, happens when the common understanding in the country is no longer, effective. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that for people to be a nation, for people to be together, to form a nation and function as such, there has to be common understanding around certain key problems of that country, such as economy, politics, development. Those key areas of the country needs to be commonly understood by all the people who are part of that nation. And that is how people are able to work, to build, around that common understanding and build their nation. But when there's different understanding, in terms of what the economy of Ethiopia needs to be, what the politics need to be, what the vision of the country need to be, obviously, eventually that breaks the trust and the bond between the people, and that can even escalate into war. Therefore, the national dialogue is a process that then allows different people with the different viewpoints to come together and then put all their views on the table, from which discussions, conversations can, meaningful discussion, conversation take place, and after which we have then a common blueprint that then represent the hope and expectations of all the parties, all the stakeholders, and that's how we are able to reframe, the blueprint, or even reform the country that is in a decadence like Ethiopia or other countries. So, national dialogue, in brief, is a process that allows people to merge the different viewpoints to create a collective viewpoint around the nation, and then build the nation from there on.
Grand national narrative and transitional justice collocate with national dialogue. How?
Look, there have been a lot of crimes committed during the war, especially from the warlords, and they cannot be peace without justice. They cannot be unity without justice. And when we talk about reconciliation, it's a matter of trying to solve, the crisis, or I should say, trying to heal the wounds of the hearts that have been broken by war and stuff like this. So, for you to have a sustainable peace that will come out of the dialogue, there has to be as well the transitional justice, which means that those who were involved in crime, because look, we don't want dialogue to be like an escape door for those who have committed crimes, so that they can feel like they will receive some kind of amnesty, through the dialogue, and they will be forgiven if they've committed crimes against the humanity or those kind of atrocious acts. Therefore, transitional justice is important to bring about justice to those who have been offended and those who have been offenders. At the same time, bringing the country into the dialogue, so that at the outcome of the dialogue, or of all this process, we have justice and we have peace, which then allow the country to develop and move forward.
Kabala, you've mentioned South Africa and Rwanda and other African nations who have held this national dialogue many years ago. What do we learn from South Africa? It's a good model, I guess, and it's your country. Currently, you're in South Africa, and you're very familiar with the socio and political dynamics of the country. Tell us the good tips from experience of South Africa in handling national dialogue and having this peaceful nation now.
Before I give some positive points in the national dialogue in South Africa, I should firstly mention that I don't think there's a clear comparison between what is about to happen in Ethiopia and what is happening in South Africa. Because what is happening in Ethiopia is a legitimate government that wants to initiate the dialogue to end war and to create, a durable peace in the country. However, in South Africa, it was a case of an oppressive regime, of white monopoly.
Yes.
Oppressive regime of white monopoly, right? Trying to stop oppressing African people. Therefore, there was a dialogue in order to have that transition from apartheid into a democratic South Africa. But what is happening in Ethiopia is not something like in South Africa. It's not like Ethiopia want to transition from apartheid or from oppressive regime towards some kind of democratic regime. I believe that Ethiopia is far better democratic regime than some countries in Africa. However, what is happening in Ethiopia is just trying to bring all the differences together so that we can stop war and we can create a condition of peace, right? So, but what can we learn from the South African case? It's simply that for any meaningful results to come out of any dialogue, any process of dialogue, people need to be honest about themselves. People need to stop, to put aside their ego, to understand that we go to dialogue in order to concede, in order to compromise on our strong positions, so that we can meet each other and create a common understanding, and eventually that will lay the foundation for a sustainable peace that we want in the country. If there's too much ego, if there's no compromise, if there's no concession, then there's no results that will be different from the reality that we have before the dialogue. So I think that's the first thing that we can learn from the South African dialogue. That's the reason why the ANC, which has had a strong position before the dialogue and reconciliation process in South Africa had to abandon some of its position. People had to give in their guns so that they can go, into the dialogue honestly and negotiate and speak and come out with the democratic South Africa that we have today. So I think those are the two things that we can learn from the dialogue. Maybe on the other side, if on the different side, then if we are going to negotiate in the position of weakness, then we have a lot of things to lose than to gain as supposed to be. It has to be willingness, openness, truthful, and obviously putting aside ego and also giving up on some of the strong positions that people have so that we can expect good results out of the dialogue.
You're a communication strategist, and what is the role of media in creating public awareness in connection with this national dialogue?
I will tell you clearly that the role of the media depends on who pays the bill. The Western media will always try to paint a picture which is not a reflection of the reality in Ethiopia. But speaking maybe from the pure angle of things, I would say the role of the media is to inform people, is to educate people so that people can understand the importance of the national dialogue, and also try to educate people in terms of their rights in the have to participate. So I think that's basically the role that the media has to play, which unfortunately is not what we see in the world today. Most media do what is expected from the people who pay the bill, people who sponsor them, people who pay them, most importantly, people who own the media. So that's the challenge that we have in Africa.
How about this agenda selection process and selecting participants and delegates? What ought to be the procedure? I mean, from your experience again.
Well, it has to be first, those representatives that will be selected have to be people who are coming from community levels, people who have been selected firstly or elected by the communities, because they are coming from the communities, they know the needs of the communities. And those are the people who will be able to bring some important or some meaningful inputs into in the process of the dialogue or into the framing of the blueprint of the dialogue. So I think the process is pretty much simple. It has to be people who have been appointed or selected by any means. It can be through elections, can be through designation from the community level, regional level, to form that national body that will eventually define the blueprint of the dialogue and eventually participate in the dialogue itself.
Ethiopia is viewed as a mother of African independence and a symbol of African independence. How do you, curtail Ethiopia's peace to the entire continent?
Well, that's very consequential. In fact, we don't see Ethiopia just like a mother of African independence, but we see Ethiopia as a mother of African resistance against the colonialism, right? And the same way that the Western man will look at Rome and Greece, as the backbone of Western civilization. We also look at Ethiopia. We look at Kemet, which is Egypt. We look at Nubia as the backbone of our civilization as African people. So we have lost already Kemet because Egypt today is not really African. It's a kind of Middle East in terms of its demography. So the only symbol of of our civilization that we have in Africa today is Ethiopia. So therefore, a peaceful Ethiopia, a successful Ethiopia, a prosperous Ethiopia is definitely an important and meaningful symbol for African peace, African prosperity, and African, progress. So we really wish that Ethiopia can be in the state of peace, because that peace will eventually trickle down to all the countries. Because remember, it's through Ethiopian resistance that we all then begin to fight for independence, right? So it's also through Ethiopians' prosperity and progress and unity that all of us will learn about unity, will learn about reconciliation, will learn about solidarity, and eventually we'll have to emulate the same example of Ethiopia so that Africa as a whole can prosper and can move forward. So Ethiopia is very significant in African history and also in African future. That's why I said it's not just a symbol of independence, but it's a symbol of resistance against colonialism and today neo-colonialism.
Yes, during your previous interview, you highly appreciated Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed for his work in bringing regional integration and continental unity. Do you have the same stand now as well?
Exactly. So our view is this. Every time the Western, because remember in 2000, summer 2019, Abiy Ahmed was a laureate of, received the Nobel Peace Prize. And mostly when the Western civilization recognizes somebody, it means that person is not useful for African development. But sooner after the Nobel Peace Prize, there was a propaganda to demonize Abiy Ahmed because of the policies and initiatives that he took to bring unity and mostly to resist imperialism in his country. And automatically, when the Western media begin to demonize him, we take a different stand. We believe that he's the right person for Africa because every time they clap their hands for you, you are not useful to your people. And every time they begin to attack you, then you become relevant because you are doing something useful to your people. That's how we're standing at the moment with a prime minister, and we support him. We believe that through his leadership, and if this process of dialogue can successfully go on, Ethiopia can become one of the peaceful region in the East Africa, and that peace can even trickle down to Kenya, to Somalia, to other regions on the continent.
Well, Kabala John, any remark finally, if you have any message, remark on behalf of your organization, ACUP?
Yes, of course. We want Africa to be free and to be a global power base, as I said from the beginning. But for that to happen, for that freedom and that power to be effective, we firstly need to fight against imperialism. And one of the tools that imperialism is using to undermine our development and progress is dollar, is currency, or is a SWIFT system of payment. All these tools of America, tools of America are used to undermine African efforts. So de-dollarizing Africa, it's a step forward, or is a good step towards fighting and winning over the imperial forces that have been undermining Africa and eventually pave a way for the progress. So therefore, as I said from the beginning, we need to internationalize our struggle against imperialism. We find it necessary to work with China, to work with Russia, to work with Iran, to work with North Korea in this process of fighting imperialism. Imperialism or neoliberalism has been globalized, has been internationalized. Therefore, you cannot believe that Ethiopia by itself will overcome the forces of imperialism, or South Africa or Congo or Kenya by itself alone can win over imperialism. It's only when we are able to come together to internationalize our struggle, to globalize our struggle against imperialism, then we have a better chance to win. So my message, I do appeal to the leaders in Africa, starting from the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, to really shift his vision from being local towards international, because the forces that we are fighting against, even though we believe that this is our Ethiopian struggle, is not Ethiopian struggle, it's African struggle. It is international power that we are fighting against. We need to come up out of our comfort zone and to begin looking into how we can internationalize this struggle by joining our efforts together. Let us not really look at it as an Ethiopian problem. It has to be African problem. And by that, we'll be able to effectively, put down the power of imperialism and begin to build Africa as a continental or as a global power base.
Okay, Kabala John, thank you for your invaluable insights.
My pleasure.
Okay. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. This brings you to the end of our edition for today. Bye-bye. Take care.